That was incredible.
Hell yeah.
I think this is such an interesting blend of American auteur cinema and studio filmmaking. Sean Baker's really been on a different level over the last few years. Like, PTA level really, really good.
Him and PTA both coming with very distinct and I guess sort of indie auteur backgrounds. And I guess in the sense of them both humanizing the lives of sex workers.
Yeah, the way he tells the story in such an exuberant and engaging way does remind me of Boogie Nights. I remember seeing the Florida Project back in 2017 and thinking, wow, what a talent. But this was really something else.
It might be just the Universal Studios logo at the beginning tinting my lenses on this, but this one felt more accessible and overall more polished, both in production value and presentation.
Right.
The whole first act with Yvonne and Anora is just such a joyride. Just from the opening scene, the first act is just popping with young energy, with these kids just enjoying their lives with basically infinite dough. I also really liked how this film had so many awesome laugh out loud moments. Like, I did not expect this palm-winning film to have this much humor. The cinematography was also incredible. It's got this wide, anamorphic feel to it, where the sides feel warped in an interesting way, and I think the film was shot on film, which really worked to its advantage. It really captures the spectacular visuals of the parties, Vegas, the clubs, as well as the more quiet, intimate moments wherever needed. So the widescreen film print surprisingly manages to capture both the spectacle and the intimate in the best way possible. And of course, Mikey Madison is phenomenal in her role as Annie or Anora, and so is the rest of the entire cast of the film. The film couldn't stand on its own without the incredible performances and the comedy that's delivered through them as well. The whole movie dealing with sex workers might not exactly be something that general audiences would embrace with open arms, but I personally didn't mind the way Baker handled the subject matter, or how he intentionally stayed away from hammering in some kind of an explicit message.
It's certainly one of the main ideas that this film is interested in, representing the internality and humanity of sex workers. You see this reflected through the ways most people treat and perceive Anora, and especially in the eyes of higher society, she doesn't seem deserving to be treated like a regular human being. Like how nearly all the members of Ivan's Russian family/gang all seem to deny the validity of Anora's relationship with Ivan, and even go as far as to outright deny the authenticity of her feelings towards him. These people are all out to tell Anora that he actually doesn't love you, or that it's not actual authentic love.
The Russian guys trying to stop Yvonne were so funny. I honestly thought that there was going to be some serious gang violence in the third act with the main family getting involved, but the movie shoos all that away by turning the goons into bumbling, clueless idiots pretty early on, which still worked for me and kept me engaged in the story without having to rely on the usual dread of ever-escalating violence.
Yeah, the Russian guys were really funny, and reminded me of the old school slapstick comedy of the Keystone Cops or the Three Stooges.
There are also a lot of car scenes in this movie.
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought that was really interesting. Not just because the car scenes were needed to move the plot, but because they also represented something else. I think the interiority of the cars and private planes was interesting, particularly when thinking about the character of Ivan. He's never actually in control of the vehicles that he rides in. He's not able to drive the cars inside of his father's home, which first of all reflects his lack of responsibility, and of course, reflects his inability to have any degree of control in steering the direction of his life, compared to Igor, who is able to drive.
Huh. That's interesting.
There's so much irresponsible fun to be had in the first half of the film that you know that it's just all gonna go downhill somewhere eventually. It's structured like a Cinderella story, but done in a Sean Baker fashion.
Right. Also, the whole Cinderella aspect is also true with the whole your time is going to be up at 12 o'clock tomorrow. It's not 12 o'clock at midnight like Cinderella, but 12 o'clock at noon, which is still interesting.
The ending, I think, is up for audience interpretation, whether or not if it is a fitting conclusion for this version of a Cinderella story.
I think Anora is still left with some sort of a happy ending. Igor seems like a good guy, though we don't know for sure if they're going to be together.
Yeah, I think that's what's important here. Igor seems to actually see her as Anora and not Annie, unlike Ivan. The ending somewhat echoes the Cinderella story arc, not just because of the fairy tale-like conclusion with some hope for a better future, but also because Igor is someone who really seems to see her as a person, unlike almost everyone else around her. For most of the sex scenes between Ivan and Anora, the two never really make eye contact. And it's when Anora confronts Ivan that he's finally forced to lock eyes with her, and him putting on his shades at the end, I thought, was Baker firmly expressing Ivan's blindness towards Anora. Ivan also only calls Anora Annie throughout the entire film, while Igor likes the name Anora more than her false name.
I also just loved seeing how derpy and stoic Igor was throughout. Like, the quiet chemistry between him and Anora was just so on point, even in the smallest moments. Baker definitely knew how to handle those awkward moments between the two whenever they felt needed. The two also share that bond with them both having fond relationships with their respective grandmothers.
Yeah, and also, unlike the family attorney and Ivan's mother, who can't even stand to look at her face properly for longer than 3 seconds, Igor actively makes his way to literally see Anora's face and into her eyes as clearly as he can. While the windshield wipers on the car offer a clear vision forward for the driver, Igor wants a clear and honest view of Anora's face. And that's why I thought having the sound of the windshield wipers linger was a great way to end the film.
The ending was kind of sobering, and while I get that it does give the film this fairy tale notion of a conclusion, it does end on a bit of a somber note, at least tonally, and it did get my head scratching a bit with how it just ends there, and how it's not like this grand finale that Anora's been deserving for her entire life.
I agree. But it's not necessarily on a hopeless note either.
It's not hopeless, but it's just not that super upbeat, like the kind of tone that we got used to in the first act.
It's not, and maybe that's part of the point. The dream is over, Anora's wide awake and back in her status quo, but at least there seems to be a tinge of hope going forward, with someone helping her take the first step in healing her past wounds, and seeing her not just as an object or an outcast, undeserving to be properly seen by the eyes of society, but just as another human being.
Touché.